Too
Hello.
noisy. Is that good? There we
Hey,
go.
hello, hello. So how are you doing? How was your Oslo World experience?
Whew. I mean, it was interesting. I think that at some points, it was just me wandering around in some rooms, trying to navigate the penguins and things.
Yeah,
So it was a little bit of a learning curve in the beginning, but I think it was really nice that they pulled it off. I mean,
yeah,
it's difficult times and they made it beautiful and they tried to make it as easy as possible. So that was good.
yeah. It worked. It worked out really well. And one of the great things for me for Oslo World was that I met you, and I really started like seeing the work you've done, and I was like, wow, okay. I need to ask so many questions. I need to get to the bottom of this because it's quite a lot of things. So
Ah,
so I usually do these interviews, and I speak to different people who work in the music industry, and I always start off with asking everyone to give us a bit of background about themselves. But in your case, UK born, Malawi-bred, South Africa based. Tell us the whole story.
okay, well, when people ask me to tell the whole story, we'll be here for 5 hours. I'm going to try and sort of squeeze it into, an appropriate amount of time. When I was born, my parents were living in the UK. They had just moved there. I think it was 10 years before I was born. My father was studying to be a doctor, and they both came from Malawi. I mean, they love, their lives in Africa. Um, and so my dad said, you after I was born, he said, we have to go back to the continent, but maybe we can't go back to Malawi. We need to sort of level up in terms of our lives. And so we can always go back and visit, but maybe Cape Town is the thing because this is where the first heart transplant was ever done. And if I'm going to be a good doctor, I have to go to Cape Town. So my mom said, all right, fine. It was the 80s, which means apartheid was in full swing. When they got here, all kinds of barriers to just having a good life popped up. People didn't want them to live in the neighborhood they wanted to live in. They couldn't buy the house they wanted. People tried to petition them to leave. It was just, and so I suppose that kind of start kind of encompasses why I inject so much about identity and your sort of background and what makes you you into my work, right? So over the years, I noticed that the schools I was going to didn't have a lot of Black women or Black girls. Um, it was difficult for me to sort of assimilate, but eventually I did. And sort of growing up, every time I realized that I had a difficult time, it was music that kind of brought me back, to a place where I felt like maybe I could sort of fit in here or express something like this. Or so that's really, I think, the source of it. Just understanding identity politics is very important for, everything. Most people will call it, I mean, there was this one time where somebody had said identity politics are like sports and music or something like that. I just thought, people treat them like, yeah, like
Yeah,
pastimes.
yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah,
very strange. Talking about yourself and where you come from isn't really a game.
yeah.
It's how you make it in the world, right? So I find that very interesting. Um, and in trying to sort of assimilate, I suppose I figured that maybe if music was my card, to get into any door in any place, then I might as well get to know as much of it as I possibly could. And so back then it was easy to do because no internet. Um, so you'd have a top 40 chart and, I would listen to all the songs and I knew all the words and everything. And I tried to unpack what was going on in these songs. And this was back when people still did music reviews regularly. You'd get them in the Sunday paper. So I thought that's what I should probably do. I had a blog as soon as the internet started up in varsity. And I'd listen to some obscure music and then might write a little review, which nobody read, obviously. I mean, and yeah, I
The
was
early
studying
days.
art.
So was it? This was while you were a student.
Yes, this is why
Okay,
I was a
okay,
student.
okay.
I was supposed to be painting, sculpting, working out art history, but instead I was in the yard listening to music during class. Terrible. My parents were very upset when eventually I did fail. Um, the only class that I passed was critical theory. Had nothing to do with anything else. But I was excelling at critical theory and just, doing terribly at everything else. So I wasn't paying attention. And so after that, my parents said, look, if you're not going to step it up in terms of your studies, you're on your own. So I became a little bit desperate. I thought, okay, what am I going to do? So I took up a job at a CD shop.
Okay, good start.
Yeah, it's a good start.
Yeah.
Right. So things just sort of snowballed from there. I remember I was on my break one day, and this woman, I bumped into her, yeah, at one of the restaurants, and she said, um, I love the way you speak. And I was just sort of like, okay, this is rude. But then she said, I want you to come and do this voiceover. And it was for Elle magazine. And that was my first voice job. And after that, things like radio became, a reality for me. I didn't think that anybody would, sort of find me out of the blue, but they did. And so I started combining the writing with the radio, and I was doing voiceovers more regularly so I could quit the job at the CD shop. And then there was a company called One Small Seed. It was a magazine that was really popular around campuses. It's a great magazine, music reviews in there and everything. And I said, hey, let me just shoot my shot. And I sent them my blog. And they said, when can you start? And I thought, okay. And since then, one thing led to another. Okayafrica got in touch and said they wanted a writer. And this was before they had their South African offices. Then Afropunk became a thing, and it just sort of evolved. I started putting together lineups of small parties in my neighborhood. Then we went on to do Design Indaba. They wanted a music circuit manager, so I found a bunch of acts, programmed the festival. We did the bookings, we did the accounts, everything, and I was also writing reviews for those musicians, and everything just sort of came together. I'm going to skip a whole lot of steps from here. There were a lot of festivals that I was doing. Encounters was a film festival. They also had some music that they wanted and a guest liaison. And so I kind of had to learn on the job because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I haven't studied any of this. I don't know, what I'm supposed to be doing. But you figure out, people.
Yeah,
you,
definitely. Definitely.
mm,
And so basically to find out more about what you did, so I checked your LinkedIn, I Googled your name, I saw a bunch of biographies, and I was like, there's so much there that I wanted to know, what would you define yourself as, because you, like, on one hand, you do voiceovers, on another hand, journalism, on another hand, you organize festivals, on another hand, there's so many different things that, PR and media work, media management. And I was just like, what, like, it all falls under a circle. But like, if you had to choose the one where you feel the most at ease as, what would it be?
well, I'm so glad that you're asking this because I think I come from I grew up in a world where people expected you to pick one thing and excel at that one thing and do that one thing for the rest of your life. And that's how you measure success or whether you're competent. There's that saying, jack of all trades, master of none. Well,
Yeah.
if you master yourself, it doesn't matter what trade you pick up. And that's what I, believe. So I'd say the one thing that really brings me a lot of joy, which it's another thing I'm adding to the list. I was working at Black Major, and I was doing media strategy, and we were working very closely with the artists and trying to make sure that they understood what they were talking about when people interviewed them. Why do you want to do this kind of music? What does it mean to you culturally? What does it mean about you as a person? And some of these artists had no idea what they were going to say. They didn't think of it like that. They thought it was fun. It was something that they've always just done or wanted to do. There's a strong feeling behind a really great skill, but they didn't really know how to articulate that. And so right now, I've just started working with a young artist called Amos. Funny thing is, I'm not a manager, but managing his media has helped me get to understand him and the people of South Africa and what they want and need. And it's just been a very fulfilling experience. And I think this is something that I've wanted to take a little bit of all of my different experiences and sort of pour into an artist and help them to be able to speak on the radio, help them to be able to write their own life story. It's all, I think it's all necessary. So
Because
yeah, that's really cool.
by looking at your profile, I noticed you never managed an artist per se, like one-on-one. And at the same time, I noticed you've done all the work around them, as you've just said. And I just think like it falls under branding or almost label management without the daily work of, you have to go and rehearse and do whatever. So I was looking at all these things, and then on top of this, I realized that you founded the African Consciousness Institute. So tell us more about that, because I'm very interested about that.
Well, my father, again, he came from a sort of a, what's the word? A physiological background in terms of medicine. So everything to do with the body and how it works and, you know, how you can heal it. And along the way, he wrote a book called, I can't remember what it was called, but it was about African traditional healers and how Western medicine and Eastern medicine as well can come together with African medicine and see, you know, what all the similarities are around it and why people believe what they believe, you know. He always used to say that when you have clarity of mind, it's like you're listening to the radio. And when we talk about ancestors, right? When ancestors speak to you, it's like listening to the radio. And when you tune into that specific frequency, you can hear everything very clearly. The music is sharp, you know, you're moved by it. It's like it's made for you. But when you have lots of different sort of white noise, when you're between two frequencies and things are a little bit hectic, you won't hear anything. It's noise. It's just, you know, it's that. And so what we need to do as human beings is, and he realized this when he was writing his book, what we need to do, because there was an African traditional healer who told him that and used that analogy for self-knowledge and connecting with your ancestors or your, whatever your higher power might be. And at the time he said, you know, if we don't tune to our right frequency, we'll always hear that noise. Whether we believe in a higher power or not, we need to understand ourselves and be attuned to what makes us sound sharp and sound beautiful and be heard. So I said to him, that's great. This is something that I've been battling with my whole life, you know, identity politics, all of those things, and trying to make sense of what it is that is driving me. And so he said, well, you know, he's also a sort of like a life coach. So he's a professor at the Graduate School of Business and he teaches personal transformation. So he'll sit and talk to people and try and sort of help them to figure themselves out and why they do what they do. And it's not really like psychology, but I just found that when it comes to creativity, especially with musicians as well, this is exactly the kind of thing that a lot of musicians need. They need to be able to better understand themselves in order to be able to put something into the world that's of value and something that will mean something to them. And so we decided, all right, I'll do the cultural side and he'll do, you know, the sort of coaching spiritual side, and I will throw in a little bit of business knowledge because you have to know yourself in order to be able to direct somebody else. And we started doing some events. We had, event spaces, very difficult to come by in Cape Town sometimes, but we found this basement in a restaurant that used to be called the House of H. It was covered in graffiti, beautiful graffiti that artists would come and do, and it was supposed to be a parking area, but people would have events down there. And we got everyone that we could think of in Cape Town to come and perform from different African countries. They talked a little bit about where they were from, what their sound is about. We had a debate in the beginning as well, where we invited different people from, creative people from Cape Town scene to talk about their lives as African people. And the question that we posed to them was, is Kanye West onto something? Are Black people uncomfortable by choice? And obviously it became very heated. There were a lot of hurt feelings. You could definitely see the dynamics between xenophobia and Afrophobia, things like that. We had an American who was speaking, who was, you know, screamed at by someone who said, well, you're not from here. How could you possibly understand what we're going through? And it's just interesting to hear that because it's exactly what people needed. They don't feel as if they can say those things out loud. So I think that's another reason why music comes into it for me, is because people can say what they need to say out loud and have people respond in an almost safe and creative way. And I say almost safe because not every musician around the continent is treated well when they say what they need to say. But
I think that's a very common thing even out here. You know, like when you say things that might be politically charged, then you might face issues. But I think it's always been like that, and I think it always will be like that. I don't think that's going to change. That's like the status quo. But we need people to speak out. Like we need that. We can't just, you know, chill and say like, okay, you know, whatever happens, and we sing only about love and happiness. Yes. Like every song is about that. So I think it's really important. And so how long has this institute been going on for now?
Well, it's been a few years, but to be honest with you, because of all of the things that have snowballed since I started working, my father had to say, look, go and live your life, do your thing. You can't do everything. So put this one down. We'll come back to it when we have some time. So during lockdown over the last couple of months, we had our, we call it dealing with stress. And we just had a sort of Zoom session like this one where we talked about different ways that people could deal with some stress. That's the most we could possibly do at this time. But yeah, just a couple of years. We're not very old, but things have been slow.
No, but I think it's really important because I think that, communication is key in everything within yourself, within others and stuff like that. And it's important, especially in different societies. It's something that we lack massively over here. I mean, we had a 15-year civil war and there was never really closure. So like, it's just one day to the next, like, okay, the war is over. And there's no mention of it, like how or why, and all those people who died just as if nothing happened. It's just like when we had the explosion here, we never have closure, which is something I think that a lot of people need. You need to have closure, and communication is a key to that. And
Yes.
But also another thing I wanted to see, so well, I'm just looking because I wrote a bunch of the stuff that you do, and you've worked, so I'm going to name, you mentioned some of these before. So you've worked with Red Bull, you've worked with Mixmag, Music Africa, who else? The Black Major, so many of them, like the list is endless. And today, no, you shouldn't feel. It's great experience. We're only at halftime. I always say that we're only at halftime. There's double the amount of what we've done on the way coming.
Mm-hmm.
And currently you work with Platoon.
Yes, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. My role has just changed this month. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me more about Platoon itself, because I was very intrigued by that, and what your role is with them.
Well, I started out the beginning of this year doing campaign management. So we would have one artist who had a release coming up, and we just needed to secure their rollout plan, make sure that they have their artwork, make sure that everything about them is understandable and communicable. So what I would do, we called them coffee dates. So what we would do is I'd sit with the artist for about an hour, we have some coffee, I just ask them about themselves and their lives. And I see now that this is exactly what my father would be doing for some of his students. Just sort of try to get to the bottom of what makes them them and how they want to present to the world. And so then I'd go back with this interview and we would create their bios, their profiles, put together sort of a one sheet and make sure that all the information that they want to be included is included. So it's not as if we say this young person who is 26 years old is doing R&B, here's the music. There needs to be something more. And we talk a lot about stories. We need to hear what people's stories are and make sure that they're communicated properly. So storytelling is a very important one. Like you said, communication as well. The way that you extract the story from someone needs to be done very carefully. And with those, we were able to unearth some really interesting material from some of these artists. And I think when they're heard by somebody who's supposed to be a label exec or somebody who's basically in the car with them on their journey through the musical career, it makes them a little bit braver. And I think that's important as well. When we're talking about musicians need to sing about more than love and happiness, this is how that comes about, I think.
And as you're saying, which is a really good point, the importance of storytelling, I think it's massive. And if you had to tell artists today, let's say there's a few artists who might be watching this, if you had to tell them to go into storytelling for the way they present themselves, what are the key things they should be focusing on, other than obviously themselves, but like in the wording, in the way they present themselves? What are the stuff that you feel are the triggers that catch people's attentions in storytelling?
I think there is sort of a blueprint to most stories, and there's that cycle of the hero's journey, right? There's got to be something where you have this individual, there's something in their way, they're overcoming it, they're going to the depths of whatever part of them they need to go to be able to mine, the sort of precious stones about a bad situation and bring them back so that they can share them with everyone. And I think that's where you get most people. It's one thing to be representative of a fashionable wave or to have lots of numbers on Instagram. I mean, those things are fine, but what, and this is the thing, when you do that digging in, that sort of soul searching, those gems are unique to everyone. There are no two alike. So what really you need to do is to get to the bottom of that mine and just sort of bring back something that's very authentic and very unique about you. And there is always something. And I think that's the thing that gets people.
And
Something
what
that's
do you think that there's an importance in when you're telling your story to mention where you're from? Because I feel that because this is something that I feel, at least for Lebanese artists that are trying to export themselves abroad, if you say you're a pop singer who has 3-4 albums, who went through this and that, it's one thing. But when you mention where you're from, it suddenly gets a different sort of reaction. And I want to know what you think about mentioning your background, where you're from. Actually, if you say you're a South African artist, is it essential? And B, what do you say about artists who perform in their local language versus performing to cater to an international audience? What do you think of those two things?
Well, I think that it really is up to the artist. Sometimes the artists are from a place they're not proud of. Their background is not something that, that gives them energy and is able to sort of speak in a way that makes them proud. And I think that if an artist is not ready to say, this is where I'm from originally and this is why, maybe it's not so essential. Maybe they just need to share a certain part of themselves for this, whatever this release is or whatever this track is, and then sort of wait until they're a little bit further along to be able to sort of dig deep for those gems that we talked about. So yes, and I also think that when people speak about where they're from originally, I love this question because everybody asks me, where are you originally from? But where are you really from? It's almost as if they're trying to decide what to do with you, how to treat you. Because if you're from, say, Malawi, for example, poorest country in the world, they don't have a lot going on, not much of an industry here. They also have their own beliefs that don't correlate with the Western world or whatever. Then people will say, oh, okay, she's probably nice. She's a bit of a pushover. She's not really, she'll take whatever she can get kind of thing. It's, the kind of narratives that people place around the places that exist in this world are, I don't think.
Do you feel that that's been changing? Like, I personally feel that personally, I feel a different strength today to maybe 5 or 10 years ago by saying that I'm from Lebanon, I'm from Beirut. I used to feel a lot more like, terrorist. That was the number one thing at the airports. Everyone looks at you. And another part of me is that I grew up 17 years in Nigeria. So I feel like Nigeria is my home as well, So it just, I think that something has changed in the sense that when you say, as you're saying, the storytelling, when you put yourself out there and you mention, I'm from here and I've done this and I've done that, I feel it has a lot more strength today because of the world we're in, where suddenly the rules have all been broken compared to many years ago, because now it's more, the digital world has taken over like the actual world. Like I would never have been able to have a call with you if all this never happened. So I don't know what you think about that, like the way things have switched in that direction. Do you feel more strength in your identity now?
I definitely do. And it wasn't always like this. I think that because of those narratives that we sort of spin around the places that people come from, like just with your story, it sounds interesting to hear that you spent 17 years in Nigeria because of the ideas that people have about Nigeria, if that makes sense. And in 10 years' time, those ideas are going to change again, depending on what happens in the world. So to be able to frame your story in a place, considering what's happening or has happened in that place, it adds spice to the story. So I think it's definitely something that you should lean on because it does flavor you a little bit more. But other than that, it's really up to the artist, I guess. Some artists are just not. I don't want to say this too loosely. Some artists are just not cognizant. They're not conscious of the importance of where they're from.
Yeah.
Some of them are trying to get away. So again, the story would be a lot more spicy if they mentioned where they were from and talked about what it's like to be there and why they're wanting to get away. That's where you also get to see a bit of story. So yes, I suppose it is essential context is essential.
Yeah, you know, I think I read something once where someone said content is king, but context is God. And
Yes.
I think that that's totally true. I'm just like, you know, context is everything, absolutely everything. And speaking of context, what I wanted to ask you, what do you think about when, because I have this, I experience this when it comes to music from this part of the world. What do you think when African music is labeled as world music? Like it's put into that category? Because we in the Middle East, it's the same. It's straight into the label of world music. And I want to know what you think of that, and what you think is an alternative solution to the industry labeling it as that today.
Yeah. World music, I just feel like it's such an archaic idea, you know. It's Western music and everybody else's stuff, basically. I don't think it's a very healthy way to sort of box. I mean, artists these days are also not necessarily working within a specific box. When you say world music, what does that mean? What does this box look like? And a lot of different places have very different ideas about what this music is supposed to be, or what it's like, or what its flavoring is. So how can we all just sort of, it's like the lost property type situation where you just throw all these things together and hope somebody will pick out something that they think, you know, belongs with them. But I don't know. I mean, I think that it's been a difficult one for me, because when we consider, you know, some of the dreams that artists have, like wanting to make it to the Grammys, for example, and it's this benchmark, it's such an important thing, you know, it's the ultimate validation to get a Grammy. But what category can anyone from Africa hope to, you know, to win a Grammy in? It's not going to be best hip hop of the year, or,
Exactly.
you know, best motion picture. If you know, if anyone from Lebanon or Africa wants to win a Grammy, it'll be in the world music category most likely, because we're apparently not punching in the same weight class as the rest of, you know, America.
It's the same as when I saw this picture. I love this picture actually. It's a drawing of the map of the world, and it's written when artists mention they're going on a world tour, and they put the map, they just put the US and Europe, and all the rest is ignored, and you're just like, yeah, that doesn't really make sense. So
Not a world tour.
yeah, it's not a world tour, but I mean, I hope things are changing. I mean, I have a feeling that with how things have happened in the past, I mean, especially since COVID-19 hit, I just have a feeling that things have just suddenly changed. There's more of a microscopic view on everything. Like,
yes.
One of the big topics, which also I wanted to bring up with you, is when it comes to gender equality in the music industry. When it comes to, you know, people who work in the industry and the lineups of festivals and things like this. Do you face that in South Africa, or is it not something that's really out there at the moment?
Oh, it's definitely out here, of course. You know, it's interesting. Recently, I don't know if you've heard of Rocking the Daisies.
I know of it because I know Blaise who used to work with them. So
Yes.
and I booked a band there. I think it was like 7 or 8 years ago. Lebanese band went and performed there.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it seems like a great festival. Like
It's one of the biggest.
yeah.
They are doing exceptionally well. And recently, the director of the festival stepped down to make space for 3 women to run the festival on their own, one of which was a Black woman, which is a huge step in South Africa, I think. I mean, just because we're at like 80% people of color doesn't mean that we don't still have, you know, issues with things like race and gender equality. And we definitely do.
Yeah.
Just because, you know, things haven't really been sort of portrayed the way that maybe many people would like. But you see, you know, with this kind of thing, with 3 women running such a huge festival, I mean, the things that they've done over the last couple of years, they've built sections of this festival that are just for women so that they can feel safe and they have somewhere, you know, that they can, I suppose, be incapacitated if that's what they want to do, but at least know that, you know, they're going to be protected. And this is something that we definitely need in the music industry, you know. Afropunk also had an area just for women where they could, you know, they had sort of free tampons and a place where people could have mirrors and, you know, separate bathrooms, so men weren't allowed to sort of mingle in there. We live in a world, unfortunately, where South Africa has a serious rape problem, and it's not just about rape. It's about the way that we view women and the way that we treat them and the way that we, and so for them to be able to do something like this in these kinds of festivals and to be able to make room for women to lead is, I mean,
And
it's needed.
what about
Definitely.
on the lineups? Is there a good like parity between female and male artists, or is that also very much male dominated?
Yeah, there's a lot of male, like you'll see it in a lot of dance music categories as well. So with your piano, your gqom, house, I mean, things are changing. They're making room for more and more artists, and people are having the right conversations, which is what I should say. But I would still say that, yeah, male domination in lineups still a thing. Maybe you'll get like a sprinkling of a few women, but there are still plenty of lineups that just feature men, only men. For no reason other than the fact that maybe everybody on the lineup are friends.
Yeah.
But then,
Yeah.
that's a little.
I've seen that. I've noticed that everywhere, and at least from my part, I've spoken to many friends of mine, many colleagues who are part of Key Change, and and they always say like the best thing you can do is just be an ally, and try it. And that's what I always say. Like as long as we can be an ally, then we have to be an ally to this. And just on Malawi, I wanted to know what's the music scene like in Malawi, because I'm familiar with more or less what familiar to the extent of what I know in South Africa, which is gigantic. But I'm curious about what happens in the Malawian music scene. What's it like over there?
So am I. Last time I went, it was Lake of Stars, the festival they had almost every year. And those guys have been working very, very hard. I mean, they took absolute care of us when we went in 2019. I think it was 2019, 2018 maybe. My years are running together.
Yeah.
But I would say there isn't much of a music industry, but there's definitely a music scene. And I think that there's some really great artists down there who are definitely not able to really shine in the way that they want to. I'm not sure how familiar are with this, but in Malawi, for a woman to be in the music industry, it's a big deal. Doing music and making music is kind of taboo. They see it as an attention-seeking type of thing. If you don't wear your chitenje, cover your knees, cover your arms, whatever the case may be, you're calling attention to yourself and you're asking for people to treat you with disrespect, which is, I mean, it's interesting for me to say that, considering, but I don't live there, so it's easy for me to be able to be what I need to be.
Yeah.
Other female musicians, I think that they get treated very badly, and there isn't really a pipeline of sort of information and things like Lake of Stars to have that constant conversation, to be able to evolve the scene to a point where it's no longer frowned upon for women to make music. But I think that, quite honestly, I'm excited about going back. I want to go back in the next couple of months just because there are plenty of places to perform. There's not a whole lot going on with COVID. If anybody wants to tour, they should maybe stop thinking so much about Europe and the US and start thinking of going to places like Malawi.
Yeah, 100%. I've been saying this for the longest time. I mean, that's why when they say the industry, this was one of my next questions. Is like, what would you say to artists from anywhere in the world for them to start? What would you say are the main ways they can make some income given the current circumstances? Obviously, when I say this, it means that it feels like I'm catering to and speaking to the European / Middle Eastern audiences and artists. But as a whole, what would you say worldwide like are the ways for artists to make money today with given the circumstances?
There's, when you consider the big picture, I suppose you have to work with what you have or what you have access to. And I think that the number one thing that should be happening more than ever right now is collaboration, especially between people of privilege and people who might not necessarily have access or all of the things they need to be able to keep their music sort of going out into the world. So I was about to say something a little bit controversial. I need to check myself sometimes. But I really do think that we can't just rely on streams. It's just, we know that now.
Yeah.
So collaboration, if there's going to be a limited amount of gigs, maybe what you should do is try and split those gigs with another artist or something, you know, just create a little bit of a share and share alike situation so that you can do twice as much. Maybe you might, you know, feel a little bit exhausted at that, but at least everybody is getting a piece of some kind of pie. I also think that content is, again, very important. Try to make sure that you have content, you're keeping a conversation going, you know, you're having meaningful conversations and contributing something to the global conversation. Because right now, like you said, you know, we have the internet, we're having this conversation right now. There isn't really, unless you're from a country where you don't have a lot of internet access, there isn't really an excuse for you to not engage. So I think as much as you engage, then it'll help brands and also, you know, other audiences understand you. So reach across those borders. You know, you don't have to, you know, there's an assignment that I'm working on for Resident Advisor right now, and I'm trying to put together a podcast that explores the Amapiano scene. And a lot of these artists are finding it difficult to talk to me because I don't understand their language and their English probably isn't that great. So what I'm trying to do is make that not an issue. It's not an issue if an artist can express themselves in their own language, even when they're asked something in English. There are ways around that so that they can still get onto platforms that they need in order to get bookings. They, you know, to be in the face of brands, you know, to be able, if people are loving the music with the language that they're speaking, why can't they do interviews with the language that they're speaking? It doesn't, I don't know. I don't see the problem with that. But again, it's about the audience. What does the audience want, you know? And if they, what does the audience want? And if they are not prepared to bend their ears around someone else's language, I mean, it's
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, like language shouldn't be a barrier. I mean, I know I listen to many things that I don't understand. I mean, honestly, and I'm sure a lot of people do. There's so many. I mean, not everyone speaks French, and a lot of people know a lot of French artists. A lot of people listen to French music, and not everyone speaks English either. You know, so and people listen to all sorts of English music and even Arabic music and even, I don't know. I mean, Korean music. The BTS are arguably the biggest selling band in the world right now, and I'm pretty sure it's not only Koreans that listen to them, you know. So this is the thing. So I think, I don't think language should be a barrier. I think just in the choice of language, I don't know if there's a formula of what works and what doesn't work. I always ask this question because here we have a lot of artists that perform in English, and and there's those who perform in Arabic. And when you look at the big picture, those who perform in Arabic tend to have more success in the region, in the country, in the region, and internationally. But that doesn't mean that everyone who listens to them speaks Arabic. So it's a strange one to go into. And one final question: do you think that live streaming concerts on whatever, Zoom, Instagram, whatever it may be, do you see a future for that becoming, I know it's going to be an alternative, but do you see artists making proper money from this in any way? Because I think it works for bigger artists, but I mean, the little independent artists, do you see ways for them to make money off live streams? I mean,
I think that there will be a solution. Our global music industry won't survive if we don't make it happen. So as much as we love to have streaming and, you know, have a young Spotify playlist and all of that, what we really want is that atmosphere that's created by a band playing together. And we need to be able to see that online. I think that brands will come on board and will, you know, we've got Versus now as well. This is something that artists who have not been active for years are suddenly able to do. And you can feel the energy and the love behind the music again. So maybe it hasn't all the way been figured out. Now we just know that we can jump online and we can share our music with the rest of the world, but we don't know if it's going to generate income, right? I think that there will be someone smart and clever and forward thinking who will come up and say, this is how we need to do it. Whether it's cryptocurrency or, you know, whatever the case may be. If they need to pass by every label and just do something on their own and find a way to generate their own income just like that, I believe there are people who are thinking that way. And any day now they could pop up. And
I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens next. I mean, already it's for me, what's happening now is ultra interesting. Like I'm every day there's something new happening, and I'm just like, wow, okay, how quick can we move next? But yeah. Anyway, Shiva, it's been great. Thank you so much. I will definitely tag you and do the whole thing with this when it's done. And hopefully I'll get to meet you in real life sooner rather than later. And
Yes.
we can actually properly discuss these things for longer periods of time.
Thank you so much. This has been really nice to do.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you so
it.
much. So have a good rest of the day and speak soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.